One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battle-Born Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Out in Front, my name is Annette Magnus. I'm the Executive Director of Battle-Born Progress. So excited to have you this evening to talk all about Nevada's ballot measures. We are talking about the statewide ballot measures on your Nevada ballot this year, which are questions 1, 2, and 3. We have a new Nevada ballot guide that Battle-Born Progress has put out. We put this out every election cycle with our guidance and our recommendations on the ballot questions based on our education around these issues, our work during the legislature around these issues, because many of these issues went through the legislature to get here, and all of the things that we work on every single day have influenced our decisions to take positions on these ballot measures. Tonight, joining us, we have 3 amazing guests. Excited to have them on with us this evening. We have Emily Zamora. She is going to be talking to us about question 3. Our recommendation is to vote no on question 3, and we're going to talk about why. We have Christine Saunders with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. She is here to talk about all things minimum wage ballot initiative. This ballot initiative doesn't actually raise the minimum wage. It changes the way we administer the minimum wage in the state of Nevada. So we're going to get into detail about that. And then we have Kate Kelly. She is the Nevada ERA organizer for Vote Equality, which is the coalition that has been formed to support question 1. We are in support of questions 1 and 2 and encourage you to vote yes on those questions. So Kate, I want to bring you in, welcome you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about Vote Equality and the good work that y'all are doing and why you're in Nevada to help us pass this important initiative.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I worked on many different things in many different states over the past decade, specifically on the Equal Rights Amendment. So I've worked in a bunch of different capacities. I'm from Utah. This is where the shirt is from, and helped get the ERA introduced in Utah. As you know, it was introduced by Pat Spearman, Senator Pat Spearman in 2017, and Nevada was the first state to ratify in the modern era the federal ERA. And so Pat and others, a group of other legislators, got together in 2019 when there was a female majority in the Nevada legislature and cooked up what we're voting on now, which is a state ERA. So the question 1 would amend this Nevada state constitution. And there are a bunch of groups working on it together that have formed a Nevadans for Equal Rights. Vote Equality is the national group I work for. And then Nevadans for Equal Rights is a wide group, a wide range of groups all across the state who are working to help people understand why they should vote yes on one.
Okay, so let's talk about this because I've gotten so many questions about question 1. Number 1. Why do we need an equal rights amendment when we've already been working on one at the federal level? What is the difference between the federal ERA and a state ERA, and why do we need one at the state level? Also, why do we need to put this in when we've already worked on these issues over and over and over again? We're good on these things, which is not true. And we don't need this because it's redundant. So talk to us about those things, because I'm hearing that constantly right now, Kate.
Okay, so first question, why do we need this if we've already ratified the federal ERA? The answer to that question is the ratification of Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia, the 3 additional states to ratify the federal amendment, have not been recognized by the federal and the Fed yet finalized. It's not part of the Constitution. We do not have it as the 20th Amendment, despite the good work of folks in Nevada. So the federal ERA is still pending and may or may not ever actually make it into the federal Constitution. The next part of that answer goes to your second question, which is what's the difference between the federal ERA and the state ERA? The federal ERA is just 24 words. Equality of rights shall not be abridged or denied by the United States or any state on account of sex. That on account of sex portion means many things, but it's very related to gender. The Nevada Equal Rights Amendment, on the other hand, is much more expansive. So again, that federal ERA just says on account of sex. The Nevada ERA, which has passed already twice in the Nevada legislature, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. So those categories are way bigger than just on account of sex. On account of sex, again, is this federal Equal Rights Amendment, which has not been finalized. So I think that's part of the reason that this Nevada ERA is so important, is that it's so expansive. 26 states in the United States already have equal rights amendments, and Nevada's will be the most comprehensive and inclusive equal rights amendment anywhere in the country. So again, Nevada's leading the way on covering all Nevadans. And then that kind of leads to your third point, which was like, okay, like, don't we have a lot of laws? Like, don't we have a lot of things that kind of protect these categories in different ways? Some of that is true. There are different laws that protect different aspects. Again, this is a very comprehensive equal rights amendment, but the important thing to remember is that statutes are not permanent. We don't know what's going to happen in the future in anywhere in the country or in Nevada. We don't know who's going to be in the legislature in the future. We don't know if we're always going to have a female majority legislature in Nevada. And so an equal rights amendment is important to add to the Constitution because it's permanent. It won't change depending on who's in the legislature, who's not in the legislature. It's not a law that can be reduced or poorly implemented or totally retracted. It's easier to, depending on who's in the legislature and who's in executive power, those laws can be changed. They can be modified. They can be completely obliterated. And that is not true of an amendment. So I'll give you an example of the place that I'm from. I'm from Utah, and Utah has had an equal rights amendment in the Constitution since 1896. It was in the original Constitution, and there's like lots of background as to why Utah put in a constitutional provision regarding sex in their constitution. The short story is they wanted to become a state, and they were facing a lot of hot water because of polygamy. And so they practiced polygamy widely in the state, and they wanted to be like, we don't oppress women. Look, we're putting them in the Constitution. So that provision, that Equal Rights Amendment from 1896, since the Dobbs decision came down overturning Roe versus Wade, has been used twice to strike down the ban in Utah. So the only reason you can currently get an abortion in Utah is because of the state level Equal Rights Amendment. And so I think it's important to know that we don't know what will happen in the future, but we can stake this ground. We can say that we have equal rights in the Nevada Constitution, and that it will protect us far, far, far into the future, into times we can't even imagine, into problems we haven't yet envisioned. So that's part of the reason it's so important. And I would argue one of the most important provisions on any ballot anywhere in the United States this election.
Well, I think you've sufficiently shocked every single person with a vagina on this call. So congratulations. I am shooketh about Utah being ahead of us. As Emily pointed out in the chat, they had vote by mail before us. They had an equal rights amendment before us. Who knew? All right. Also, I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat to talk about the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which just came back. I'm a big fan. So anyways, back to the topic at hand. So why, other than the Dobbs decision, which is obviously a critical piece of why we need an equal rights amendment, but that's not the only reason, right? This is so far removed from just talking about women's rights, reproductive rights, general human rights. We're talking about enshrining in our Constitution true equality for so many different groups of human beings. So why do you think it's important right now at this moment to address equal rights in this way?
I feel like the Dobbs decision is one example of how things can go backwards and not forwards. And I think a lot of people in this country are realizing that we haven't enshrined specific rights into the Constitution and how dangerous and deleterious that can be. And so a lot of us are like, wait, what? Like, okay, how did this happen? Where do we go? And I think part of that is returning to states and state level constitutions and saying, like, we need to get this in there. We need to cement this into the Constitution. And like you said, it covers far more than that. Sex is a very, very important category. It also covers sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. Those are also very important rights to be very clear on these days. Protecting trans Nevadans and trans kids is very, very important. And so I think those are some of the other reasons and things that are getting people to the polls, abortion rights, trans rights, and protecting people on the basis of sex are very important. But race is critically important, and national origin are critically important, especially in a state like Nevada that's so diverse, and there are so many different groups of people that need this protection. So yeah, it's I think the Dobbs decision is just like a little window into why it's so important to solidify these things into permanent constitutional protection.
So I actually want to talk about that because in a few minutes, we're going to talk to Emily, and Emily and I are going to make an argument that question 3 shouldn't be enshrined in the Nevada Constitution because it's untested. Nobody knows what it's going to do. We've never done it before. I feel like, when you're talking about things like equality and human rights, which we're talking about with question 1 and the Equal Rights Amendment, that is the kind of thing that is tested. And we know we need to enshrine those things in our Constitution, because if things fall federally or people start coming after us federally, like you said in Utah, the only retribution, the only thing we have to protect us is our state constitution. So why should this be enshrined in the Constitution and not just be some flippant bill that can be overturned easily?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we've been a country long enough to know that there are certain groups that don't get the same respect and protection that other groups do. And I think Nevada is a very interesting place. I'm not from here, but I've been here for many weeks now. And there's something really unique about like Nevada, the communities in Nevada and how they operate, and how, the traditional categories don't always apply. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of cooperation and communication between groups. I'm also from the West, so it happens out West more than maybe it does out East. But I do think, the reason it's so important to just not only pass question 1, but also pass it by a landslide so that it's wildly popular, is so that we get permanent protection in Nevada that can be a bulwark against any changes federally. And then the second reason is to build momentum for the federal ERA. I think Nevada has already been a leader on the federal ERA, ratifying it in 2017 when no one thought it was possible, completely reinvigorating and resurrecting a fight that many thought was over for decades. And I think this state level ERA can also shine a beacon for other states to say, like, look what they did in Nevada. Look how comprehensive, inclusive, and incredible their state ERA is. We can do that here. We can do that in New York. We can do that in Maine. We can do that in all these different places that are currently considering equal rights amendments. And so I think it will also just be a really great example, setting, again, being pioneers, setting the standard across the country.
What are some of the myths that currently exist, the myths and disinformation, if you will, that exist around not only question 1, but the Equal Rights Amendment generally? I often hear old white women out there screaming. I can think of one off the top of my head about how horrible this actually would be for women and how bad this is for our state. And it's completely like misogynistic nonsense that's been like ingrained in them over the years. So what are some of the common myths about the ERA generally and about this measure, question 1, that'll be on our ballot in November?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's easy to know that that's not true because we already have 26 states with ERAs. So it's not hyperbole. It's not, we don't have to wonder. It's happened in many other places. And so we can know what's going to happen, and nothing disastrous has happened. The family hasn't disintegrated, they haven't, society hasn't collapsed in these other 26 states. And so I think it's pretty predictable. It will be used to protect more people, and it will be used to make Nevada more equal. The myths that I hear the most when I'm on the ground talking to folks at farmers markets or Pride Festival in Las Vegas, or, all these different places, I've heard people say 3 things. One is it will enshrine abortion rights into the Constitution, and it will mandate state funding for for abortion. That is actually a counter argument against the ERA that I agree with. So I think it will enshrine abortion protections into the Nevada Constitution. I just don't think that's a bad thing. So, I concede that's true. And we agree with the opposition on that argument. We just happen to think that's a good thing. The second argument against it is trans rights. So there's a lot of talk about bathroom panic and girls in sports and whatnot. What I can say to that is, especially for the parents that are legitimately concerned about whether or not their girl can still have a soccer team or, all these different things, I would say it's again, transphobia aside, I'm embracing a person who has a, honest concern about this. And I would say, we have Title IX, and there are still separate sports teams all the way up to the collegiate level. It just mandates that they have equal funding and support. And so you will continue to see sex segregated sports, and no right is absolute. You'll still continue to see sex segregated bathrooms. You'll still continue to see sex segregated prisons, for example. That's something, for some reason, people are very riled up about this. And the reason is, no right is absolute. So if there is a legitimate government purpose for creating the category or discriminating against different genders, you can do it. They just have to have a good reason. And that kind of leads me to my third I feel like this is uniquely Nevada. I never hear about this in other places, but the age category, this is this is the most controversial category, is age in the Nevada ERA. And the ballot supplement opposition argument basically infers that there will be no more statutory rape. Statutory rape can't be a crime anymore because of the ERA. And I've heard that from multiple people. And so I think this is a big, important misinformation point to get across, that of course statutory rape will still be a crime in Nevada, and consent will still exist. Again, the government just has to have a reason, a compelling reason to have the distinction. And so, for example, there will be a voting age law still. There will be a drinking age law still. There will be a driving age law. There are lots of ways in which people are discriminated against based on their age. Particularly, young people can't drive, young people can't vote, young people can't drink, and young people can't consent to sexual encounters with adults. And all of those will still exist because the government has a compelling reason to defend the reason, to defend the distinction. And so I think it's really important to get out there that the age category under the Equal Rights Amendment will primarily be used to fight ageism and discrimination, for example, against older people getting jobs or power being able to do certain things. So yeah, I would say that the age one is the most outrageous that I've heard, but it gets repeated a lot, and I've seen it in a couple different forums. So that's the most uniquely Nevadan argument against it, and also the most profoundly untrue.
You know, Kate, I've worked in Nevada my entire life, born and raised here, and that may be the stupidest group of arguments I've ever heard. I wish people could have seen my face during that explanation of the myths of why people are voting against this. And I hope people go home and reevaluate their thought processes on all of those things. I will say the transphobia, because it is transphobia. I don't actually give people a pass on that. I think it's all transphobia. And I don't think there is a legitimate reason for anyone to sit here and have concerns about who plays on what sports teams and things like that. I think it's all based in hate and phobias and things like that. And so I wanted to say that out loud because I really feel that way. So
yeah.
This is about equality, making sure that all people are treated fairly, all people are treated equally, nobody is discriminated against. Where can folks find more information about question 1 to make their decision in November? And obviously we have our ballot guide where we wholeheartedly support question 1. We worked on it during the Nevada legislature. We are very supportive of this measure. We want it to pass. But where can people go to find more information about the campaign, or even potentially get involved and volunteer in these last weeks before the election?
Yeah, please do. And the most important thing you can do is tell everyone you know. It's very simple. Yes on 1. That's all they need to know. Yes on 1. But if you want to know more, there's FAQs in multiple languages at equalrightsnevada.com. That's equalrightsnevada.com. And that's the website of the coalition, the Nevadans for Equal Rights. You can also go to Vote Equality, voteequality.us/Nevada. That's our website. And there's FAQs, there's ways to get involved. There's all the events listed. We're going to be in the Nevada Day Parade if you want to join us up in Carson City. And there's lots of other opportunities to volunteer. So those are probably the 2 best places. And then I would also check out and give a special shout out to the Nevada National Organization for Women chapter, Jerry Burton, and all of the other now women who have been working on the ERA for years, if not decades, and have just played a really, really crucial role in this fight.
All right, Kate. So before we go to our next guest, I want to get some questions in from the audience. So audience, if you have questions about question 1, now's your chance. We'll come at the end, but want to make sure you get your questions in now. I think this is a really important question because I think we just want to, again, be very clear about what this does and doesn't do. So what is an example of a state law that could be found unconstitutional under the state ERA? I mean, and you already talked about abortion. I think that's a key one. But what are some other examples of some of the things that could be found unconstitutional if we are to pass an equal rights amendment?
Yeah. So because the Nevada ERA is so broad, there are lots of different things. My area of expertise is gender rights and justice. So I'll give an example that I talk about a lot. But again, this covers age, this covers disability, this covers race, this covers national origin. So the example that I'll give is equal pay. So there are, a lot of folks talk about equal pay. And as we all know, women and men in this country do not make the same level. I think it's 77 cents overall, but then goes down every category. And actually Latina women's equal pay day hasn't happened yet. It's later in October. So it is a really, really big problem, particularly the most disadvantaged category is Latina women in the US. And so I think the Equal Rights Amendment could be used to fight pay discrimination, particularly from a, let's say, a municipality that was found to not be paying men and women of equal job and equal caliber the same. That's one example. I think equal pay is also it's something that's compelling to folks. So that's an example, but there are actually a lot of statutes that are gender discriminatory. And so that what happens at the federal level, for example, if they were to finalize the Equal Rights Amendment, there would be audits. And a lot of states are doing these statewide audits that go through all the statutes and determine once the Equal Rights Amendment is passed by a landslide in Nevada in November, then there could be a statewide audit of all statutes that discriminate on the basis of sex and these other categories. And so I think that's a very interesting prospect. There's talk about, asking the Attorney General could give an advisory opinion about how the statute is to be, how the amendment is to be implemented and litigated. So that's kind of one example I would give, is making sure that people are paid equally.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So for those who are watching at home, if you have more questions for Kate about the Equal Rights Amendment, question 1 on the Nevada ballot, these are statewide ballot questions. There's going to be some municipal questions as well. We didn't take positions on those this year. If you have questions on those, we're happy to answer them. But this is the statewide ballot questions. We have question 1, which we are supportive of at Battleborn Progress. We have question 2, which we're going to get to in a second, which we are supportive of. And then we have question 3, which we're going to get to, and we are opposed to question 3. So bring your questions, put them in the chat. Now's the time. We are also going to put the link to our Nevada ballot guide in the chat. It's just nevadaballotguide.com. So if you want to go there, read more about these questions, help you understand why we're supporting 1 and 2 and opposing question 3, go to our ballot guide. We are happy to give you more information on all of that. All right, Christine, I want to bring you in. Thank you for joining us again tonight. It's always a pleasure to see you. Question 2 is something that you and I are uniquely passionate about because we work very hard to get this through the Nevada legislature. Very excited about this ballot initiative. Same thing, it passed the legislature twice. Now it's going on the ballot for this election cycle. Tell us what question 2 does. Tell us what it doesn't do and why it's so important for Nevadans this election cycle.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Annette. I feel like we have talked about this issue many a times, dragging a lot of folks around Carson City with us in those spaces. But one of the things I think that's a little bit confusing about question 2 is that this has actually been a two-pronged approach this entire time. So in 2019, we passed a bill, Assembly Bill, I believe 456, to raise the minimum wage in Nevada. And that raises the minimum wage in about 75-cent increments through 2024 to $11 and $12. $11 if you offer health insurance. We have an exemption in the Constitution to allow you to pay $1 less for that, and we'll get to that in a second. But alongside that bill, we passed Assembly Joint Resolution 10 in 2019 and 2021, and that's what's before you as question 2. So question 2 does a couple things. One is it updates the Nevada Constitution to have the numbers that are the same as from Assembly Bill 456, so that they are in alignment going forward. It also clarifies that the legislature can raise the minimum wage from that number going forward without having to go through any constitutional processes again, just kind of wanting to get that out of the way. The legislature does have the power to do that, but having it clarified in the Constitution is very helpful. And 3, it gets rid of that healthcare carve out to say that if you offer health insurance, you can pay $1 less. So that once we get to 2024, we would have one minimum wage of $12.
All right, so I want to focus on the most important provision because you listed 3 things, which are all important. But those first 2 are kind of just like technical things because the minimum wage is going to raise no matter if this ballot measure passes or not. That's happened. We did that with Assembly Bill 456. Now, Assembly Joint Resolution number 10 is super important because of the healthcare provision, right? And the offer of healthcare. Talk to us about how employers were skirting the rules and abusing that provision, and really the emphasis on why we need to change this provision. Because if you're just looking at it on face value, it seems like, well, okay, well, we'll make it just the same. But this was being abused by employers. So talk to us about why this has to be changed, because it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intention in the first place was to try and get more folks health insurance. However, bad actor, businesses, corporations found another loophole. And the Constitution currently says offer health insurance, and there are not specifics as to what that health insurance looks like. So what we have seen is businesses offer really terrible health plans. Sometimes people even opt out of them. So then if they are sick, what they end up with is not having great health insurance and making $1 less an hour than everyone else. And so they are actually worse off when they hit a moment of crisis than they would have been had they been paid that dollar more. Also, since then, we have had the Affordable Care Act, which does have requirements about what employers should be covering as health insurance. And this was prior to that. So I think now it's also really useful for us to have the same guidelines for all of the businesses across the state and across the nation for what healthcare needs to look like.
But this is also a fairness issue, right? Because we did see so many employers abusing this. And what they were doing is, and I said this on the record, and I mean it, and I will continue to say it, you were much more PC about it. They were offering garbage plans. I mean, these are plans that none of us can afford. We couldn't even afford them. We have health insurance through our employer, like most people should. But these are garbage plans. Nobody can afford them. It doesn't cover anything. They were just simply offering them to check the box so that they could exploit their employees and pay them $1 less. And they were doing that over and over and over again. So our minimum wage was $1 less for all of these people who were being exploited simply because their employer offered health insurance. So talk to us about why this is a fairness issue, and why, as we continue to fight for a living wage, because $12 still isn't enough. We're glad we did it, but we need to keep going higher. Why is this such an important part of that fairness issue and that living wage equality issue when it comes to wages in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of fairness issues that when we talk about minimum wage, and I think Kate alluded to some of them as well when it comes to the gender discrimination in wages that we see. So those lower income folks tend to be women of color, primarily Latinx men and Black men make far less than the average employee. And so those folks who are concentrated in those lower wage jobs with less access to healthcare typically are folks who are facing a number of oppressions across the board. And there has been a number of studies that show that when you raise the minimum wage, there are large benefits when it comes to income equality, but also wealth equality moving forward. Your ability to access owning a home, taking care of your family, being able to ensure a roof over your head. And so we really need to make sure that as we continue this minimum wage conversation, that we take that into account. But I do agree with you. I think we started this conversation prior to 2019. $12 was the number that was brought to us as what was palatable to the business industry. And all of our organizations had a number of pieces of feedback on what we thought the minimum wage increase needs to look like. But I think that's one of the other things that's good about question 2 is that it continues to have us put the onus on the legislature to be accountable to their voters to raise the minimum wage going forward. Because Nevada voters, we're hearing across the board, folks can't afford housing. I think we recently heard that 7 of the 10 jobs that are most common in Nevada can't afford housing in the state. And so we really need to make sure that our elected officials are doing all of the things that they can do in order to make Nevada a place that everybody can call home.
You recently had the distinct opportunity to debate my dear friend, Janine Hansen, who is an anti-choice extremist, an anti-ERA extremist, anti-minimum wage extremist, pretty much anti everything that I believe she believes. So what were some of the, she was, I guess, on the opposition, but not really, because I don't think she really understands what this does. So what were some surprises that came from the debate, and what are some of the myths that exist out there about what this does and doesn't do? Because, even when I've been explaining it to some of our reporter friends, some of the folks in the community who are very, work on this a lot, if you just read the ballot guide that we got in the mail, it might be a little confusing to people. So what are some of those myths that exist, and what were some takeaways from your conversation with Miss Janine?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest myths you addressed when we got into this was that this measure does not actually raise the minimum wage. The voting no on this measure does not prevent Nevada's minimum wage from increasing. We started that in 2019. It went up July 1st of this year. It's going to go up July 1st of next year because of Assembly Bill 456. And so I think getting across that it's really that more technical fix and that healthcare carve out that is what people are voting on is really important, because I don't think the description of the ballot measure makes that entirely clear. Some of the things I heard in that conversation was a fear that removing this healthcare carve out would disincentivize businesses from offering health insurance. But I think, like I mentioned, we have other laws that are involved in that process. But one thing that we actually did agree on was that the legislature should continue to focus on the wages, that not necessarily everything needs to be in the Constitution. And I think we've had conversations about what needs to be in the Constitution to ensure that we're able to maintain those things. But really, we need our minimum wage to be monitored and looked at closely. I'll mention that there is one line from the ballot description that that stands out to me, and I had a lot of questions about when I initially read it, and it's about removing the automatic potential increase based on CPI, or Consumer Price Index, which sounds like, we want our minimum wage to automatically be going up. However, that never happened. The entire time we've had that language, never happened. Prior to the legislature taking action in 2019, the last time Nevada's minimum wage went up was when it went up to $7.25, the federal minimum wage, and then it was stagnant for about 10 years. So we really need the folks that we can call upon to take action, to be the ones who keep track of the minimum wage and are making sure that we're moving our economy forward that way.
I find it fascinating that the people who oppose this measure suddenly care about people's health insurance when they were offering garbage plans, but didn't think that their employees should pay for those garbage plans. Fascinating to me. I didn't know Janine cared about health insurance. Learn something new every day.
Yeah, I'll just mention, if you folks are interested in that, it was recorded. So there's conversations about both question 1 and question 2 with folks from the support proponent side and the opposition side for both of those measures. So I can make sure Annette has that link to share out with folks if you're interested in seeing more of those conversations.
Absolutely. We will put that in the chat for your viewing pleasure. I'm sure it's riveting conversation. And I know Nettie did a great job debating for the yes side on question 1, the ERA. Christine did an excellent job debating yes on question 2. So we'll definitely put that in the chat for you. You can also find more information on the Nevada the Nevada Ballot Guide website that we created. It has question 2 on it, why we support it. And it gives a really good explainer and breakdown of the reasons why we support it in human language that you can actually understand. So take a look at that, NevadaBallotGuide.com. We'll put it again in the chat. All right, Christine, what are some good resources other than the ballot guide? What are some good resources for people to look into for question 2 more, so that they can make an informed decision as they go into this election cycle? Because I think, honestly, so many of the ballot questions, I think question 1 is probably the easiest to understand this cycle. But I think question 2 and question 3 are a little harder to understand. And question 3, they did that on purpose. Question 2 is just really complex because of the way that our laws were written before, and we're repealing things, we're changing things, we're making tweaks, like you said, so that the legislature doesn't have to go through the hoops that we had to go through to get this stuff fixed now. So what are some good resources that you think people should look into specifically on question 2?
Yeah, I think that video I mentioned where you can hear some of the arguments in favor and opposition is a good place to look. there isn't a large campaign being run for either side of question 2. And I think part of that is because a number of folks see it as a way to kind of just be in alignment with Assembly Bill 456. And so it isn't necessarily controversial in the same way that we've seen other ballot questions move forward this election cycle. But one thing that I do think is really interesting, and I actually did recently, was to go back to the legislative sessions in 2019 and 2021 and to look at Assembly Joint Resolution 10 and to see who was there speaking in favor of those, in opposition of those, and what were the conversations being had about those. So those are both available. I'm sure folks can drop in the chat for the Nevada Legislative Information Nellis, where hearings from 2021 are available on YouTube for you to check out. And then we're far enough away from the session that the minutes are actually completed, and you can just read some of those notes if you would like to, as well as see any uploaded exhibits from people speaking in support or in opposition. I feel like you can see what Annette and I submitted if you go to those websites as well.
Yeah, you can see all of our hot takes from the session as we prepared for this moment. Yes, Christine, stick around. We are going to have audience questions in just a few minutes. So if you have audience questions from home, if you're on Twitch, you're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, share this with your friends and family. Let them know that the Nevada Ballot Guide exists. We want to get this information out far and wide. Also share this episode with them tonight on your Facebook and Twitter. Get this to as many Nevadans as humanly possible, because we want them making good decisions when they go to the polls. I'm going to say this, Emily, next week, because early voting starts on October 22nd, and literally just made me get a little bit dizzy saying that. So, Emily, want to bring you in. Emily Zamora, everyone, from Silver State Voices. Emily, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. All right, let's get to the big one. Let's talk about why we oppose question 3 and talk about what it does and what it doesn't do. So, Emily, give us the rundown of why people should be skeptical of this ballot measure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Annette, for having me again. So question 3 is a ballot initiative that talks about 2 different things. Contrary to popular belief, or what folks are advertising, it talks about open primaries, yes, but it also talks about a system called ranked choice voting. And what the ballot initiative does is that it has some things specifically for the primary, and it has some things that are specifically for the general election. And to be clear, this is not for every position. This affects constitutional offices, congressional offices, and state legislative positions. So would not affect something like city council or a school board. Now, when we're talking about what this ballot initiative is proposing, is that it's proposing that in the primary, voters would no longer have a closed primary, meaning that regardless of what party you're registered to, you would be able to participate in voting for any particular candidate. Not only that, though, it creates a system that we refer to as kind of a top 5 system. So say that we're talking about the Attorney General's race, and there are 15 candidates that are running for Attorney General. The top 5 candidates would be the ones who would make it to the general election, regardless of what their party affiliation is. So if all 15 people that are running are Democrats, for example, then it's your candidates are all going to be in the general, are going to be Democrats. And for the general election, what happens here is that you have pretty much, when you are voting for a position, you have to rank who are your top 5 candidates. Today, when you vote, you choose one candidate. That's it. The candidate that you believe should be the person that wins the election. That wouldn't happen anymore if this ballot initiative were to pass. You would have to choose top number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and of course, number 5. And so I think that's a little bit of the gist as to how this ballot initiative works. I think one thing that should be clear too is that with this ballot initiative, if it were to win this election cycle, it's not just done and over with. It would have to be on the ballot again in 2024.
Okay, so before we go on about question 3, I think it's important to explain to people watching, voters at home, how something can get on the ballot, because there's 2 ways, right? Explain the process, and if you need me to chime in, Emily, I can help you with it, or Christine can help you with it, or Kate can help you with it. But explain the 2 processes to get things on the ballot, because there's 2 very distinct ways here.
Yeah, so Nevada is one of the 24 states that allows ballot initiatives, period. And overall, I think it's a great process that we have. Annette, do you want to chime in for a moment?
Yeah, she's choking. So we have 2 ways to get ballot initiatives. The first way is to pass it through the legislature, and you have to pass it through twice. And then it goes to the ballot, and you only have to pass it once. That is how the ERA question 1 got on the ballot. And that is how question 2 got on the ballot, which is the minimum wage initiative. But there's a second way in Nevada to put something on the ballot, and that is through initiative petition. So that is when a group of voters, or in this case, a group of Republicans, get together and gather signatures and get it on the ballot, or they have to qualify by a certain date with a certain percentage of voters in each congressional district based on the previous election's math. If that happens, they gather those initiative petition signatures, and then they have to get it on the ballot. It has to pass on the ballot the first time, and then it has to come back in a subsequent election and pass again. So there's 2 ways to get it on the ballot. And now Emily is done choking. Go ahead, Emily.
That's exactly right. Thank you to my team for bringing me water. But yes, that's exactly right. And so it's the specific amount is 10% of the number of registered voters that participated in the last election. And it was a total of 140,777 signatures that had to be collected. But I think there's also some skepticism as to were all of those folks signing this ballot initiative, truly knowing all of the components of the ballot initiative. But we could talk about that for days.
All right. We're already starting to get fan mail in the chat. Can't wait. So, Emily, talk to us about, I got I call it fan mail. I got an email today claiming that I was racist to assume that people of color couldn't understand the ballot and having multiple choices and things like that. I think it's fair to say in the state of Nevada that all Nevada's voters maybe are not the most educated. It's not just people of color. It's most voters, including sometimes ourselves, when it comes to judges and the amount of judges that we're voting for. When it comes to races down ballot, we often see huge drop off because people don't know who they're voting for. So talk to us about how ranked choice, because that's really what this is about. The opposition doesn't want to talk about that, but this is about ranked choice voting. And for various reasons, some of the operatives behind this want to put ranked choice voting on the ballot so they still have a chance. So talk to us about why adding ranked choice to our Constitution is a problem, and why it is harder for especially communities of color to have information and be informed voters, when that it's a harder thing for us to do, especially in other languages.
So I think the first thing that I want to be really clear around is this notion of adding some type of electoral process into our state's constitution. It's something that, as someone who has been dedicated to election reform my entire career, I do not believe that election reform should be ingrained into a state's constitution, whether it's Nevada, whether it's Alaska, Maine, or any state in the United States. The way that a state conducts their elections should not be part of our constitution. And the reason why is because states are changing all the time. election security, election reforms, the best things to do in elections are constantly changing. And when you enshrine something into our Constitution, what if it doesn't work anymore? Or what if it doesn't work at all? The process to have to remove something from the Constitution is that much more difficult. So that's my first thing. The second thing here around this notion of racism, a couple of months ago, I had a white woman who is supporting this ballot initiative call me a racist to the media because I'm supporting this. I don't know how a woman of color that is a daughter of Indian and Brazilian immigrants can be a racist. But if somebody would like to tell me how that's the case, please let me know. So what's really frustrating about this narrative is that because we, who are individuals who work in our communities on a day-to-day basis and understand the needs of our communities, know that from that work, implementing a system like this is us being racist is just outright ridiculous. These organizations who are really pushing this don't have are not membership-based organizations. They're not doing grassroots work trying to get folks to be engaged in the political system. So, I think that's one of honestly, the biggest, the most frustrating things for me. And when we say that this is something that we know is difficult for many communities, including communities of color, it's because we have the experience of actually talking to them about electoral processes, just about the process of registering to vote, to getting out to vote, or what have you. And we have the experience collectively as a 25-member coalition of doing this in many different languages. And so we know that just explaining to members of our community who prefer to speak, Mandarin Chinese and vote in Mandarin Chinese if they had the ability, that it's a lot more difficult to explain to them this overall system because of a language barrier, and also because from their native country, there is no such thing as ranked choice voting. That's what we actually mean when we're talking about that it's a bit different. And there have also been studies in different states. The ACLU of Kentucky testified in their state legislature around ranked choice voting. And they talked about the amount of returned ballots when it comes to RCV, that the communities that saw the biggest disconnect of returned ballots because they were incomplete or what have you were communities of color. So everything that we're saying is based off our real experiences doing this work and based on the experiences of the communities we work in.
Right. It's not just because we're upset because we continue to lose things at the Nevada legislature.
No.
Anyways, so I want to talk about what is the first of all, I think it's important, and I see Laura in the chat. Laura, go off. Because Laura was also called a sexist, which I find hilarious. Doesn't make any sense. So one of the things that I love about this, the people supporting this, is who is supporting it. And I think that's really important to be made crystal clear, is who are the people who put this there to begin with, because it's not just some groups of people like ours who actually do voting rights work every single day, actually fight for democracy every single day. You and I and Christine and other partners who are watching have literally been in the trenches for years, fighting for formerly incarcerated people to be re-enfranchised, has been fighting for same-day voter registration, lengthening, extending our early vote, making sure that there's vote by mail, Christine's love of her life, all of those things that we have done over the years to improve and expand our democracy. Talk to people about why this is being done and who specifically, I want names, Emily, is behind this initiative, because I am sick and tired of these people going out there and acting like this is some sort of, martyrdom, that they are putting this forward to help and empower our voters, because that's not why this is being done.
That's exactly right. And thankfully it's Thursday and I'm ready to spill all the tea. So, when it comes to this ballot initiative, I think the one thing that should be crystal clear to Nevada voters is that this ballot initiative originated, and it is the biggest funder of this ballot initiative is a businesswoman who does not even live in the state of Nevada. Her name is Catherine Guile. She's based out of Wisconsin, and she does not know much about elections, in my professional opinion. She does not have the boots on the ground experience talking to everyday voters in states to really see what their experiences on voting is. From a lot of the folks that we have partnerships with on a national level, many folks say that she's invested in this because she wants to have more moderate candidates. What has moderate candidates done for anything? Nothing. That is why we are here. And we have not been able to do, with the exception of elections, we have not been able to do some of the key advancements that we wanted to do policy-wise. So I don't think anybody here really wants more moderate candidates. The other thing that I really have an issue with is some of these individuals who are giving money to this. The Nevada Realtors Association gave $250,000 to this ballot initiative. These are some of the same people that are behind fighting equitable housing policies that our comrades at Plan and Make the Road, so many different organizations are fighting for on a day-to-day basis. I'm not going to sit here and support a ballot initiative that the Realtors Association is going to be supportive of. And I think it's quite disgusting that these so-called progressives that are behind this are partnering up with them. In addition, Station Casinos has given at least $25,000 to this ballot initiative. And sorry, not sorry, as the daughter of, a housekeeper, I am in partnership with our allies at the Culinary Union. And I know that anything that the Station Casinos is behind is not really the best type of legislation or ballot initiative, excuse me. And then there's also CCEA, which I'm not sure I really even need to go on a rant on that one. But, they've also given a lot of money to this ballot initiative as well. So I really think that Nevada voters need to think about supporting this, because due to the folks who are giving money, and then going back to the organizations who are, here locally that are supporting this, I think, they have come off with saying that they are so supportive. They've done all of this work on electoral reform. I don't know where, because the organizations that have been behind fighting for just policies to ensure that all Nevadans have access to the ballot box are organizations that make up the Let Nevadans Vote organization. They've been the ones that have been in the legislative building since 2015, fighting against voter ID bills, but also have been advocating for vote by mail, restoration of voting rights to formerly incarcerated folks, or what have you. And the reality is that I think that this is just an opportunity for them, since they feel like legislators don't listen to them, to just go to the ballot.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, anything that Michael Roberson has signed on to, for those who don't know who Michael Roberson is, he's the former Republican Senate Majority Leader who was helped behind the scenes with voter ID in 2015. Anything Michael Roberson is behind, I am against, because once again, he is the antithesis of everything I believe. So for all you progressives out there who are calling us names and saying all kinds of crazy shit, just know you're supporting something that Michael Roberson is behind. So good luck with that. Mm-hmm. Emily, I want to talk about why enshrining, I just want to really drive this point home, because we talked about enshrining things in the Constitution, like equal rights and human rights and things like that. But we've also talked about pulling things out of the Constitution that don't need to be there, like our minimum wage, so that legislators can actually, increase it as things increase in this country, prices increase in this country. Talk to us about why something like this that is untested and, as Will in the chat pointed out, completely backfired in the state of New York in the last election. Why should we not have something like this in our Constitution, which is going to be impossible, very, very hard to change if things don't work out for us?
Ugh, don't even get, I'm going to just, on the New York thing real quick, I have to say this as a native New Yorker who was born and raised here, there, but I've lived here for quite some time. Nevada is my home. One of the biggest arguments around, ranked choice voting in New York was that we would have more progressive candidates in the mayoral race. Eric Adams won the mayoral race in New York, and he was the least progressive candidate. So I think if you're talking about such a progressive, diverse city like New York City, it's very clear that RCV does not equal more progressive candidates. But going back to the constitutional issue, as you indicated, right, and as these lovely ladies indicated as well, that there are certain things that do need to be in the Constitution. Minimum wage should not be in the Constitution because the cost of living fluctuates and changes over time. It's the same thing when we're talking about election security, election policies, election procedures. Things change, technology changes, the amount of people who are registered changes. Policies overall have to, when it comes to election systems, have to change over time. And if RCV is implemented according to this ballot initiative and it doesn't work out, or we're just seeing that over time, it's not an effective way of executing elections, it's going to be a lot harder for us to remove it. And I think the thing about elections specifically is that huge changes to electoral systems means that you have to rebuild trust with voters, and not only rebuild trust, but you have to educate them on these new procedures. And then, so we're saying this goes into effect. It works maybe 1 or 2 election cycles, then it doesn't. Then we lose the confidence in the election systems with voters if we say, hey, this is actually not working. We're seeing a low voter turnout. So, hey, now we need to remove this from the Constitution. How is that actually really going to encourage voters to participate in our system? And I mean, we're not one of these countries that has universal participation where everybody has to vote. It's a struggle enough for many of our organizations to get voters engaged because they're busy living their day-to-day lives, right? So I think those are a couple of things I wanted to share.
Emily, before we get to audience questions, I have 2 more questions that I wanted to ask you about this measure. The first question is, I've heard a lot, we've looked into this ourselves, about the methods that were used to gather signatures, both in Southern Nevada, Northern Nevada, rural communities. And they were lying to voters. And even some of the commercials right now are lying to voters about what this does and doesn't do. They are solely focused on the open primaries and conveniently leave out the ranked choice voting piece. Yeah. Why is lying to voters so problematic to get a ballot measure on? And I frankly, it's one of the biggest reasons why I don't support this actually is I believe if you're going to pass something, whether it's legislation or a ballot measure or something, you should be brutally honest with the voters about what you plan to do or not do. But they're lying to people. And we got it on video that they were out there telling people lies about this. So talk to us.
Amen, sister. Ooh. So, I mean, when this ballot initiative, it's qualified and it is going to be on the ballot. But as it was going through the signature process, we saw on multiple occasions that their canvassers who they were paying to collect signatures, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with paying folks to collect signatures because, everybody's got to make a living. So I want to be clear on that. But when they were collecting signatures, they were not being honest and transparent about what the ballot initiative includes. And many times they weren't even talking about the open primary aspect. They said things like, "Oh, do you want to have more political power in your community? Sign this petition." What community doesn't want to have more political power? Right? If somebody came up to me like that and I was quickly wanting to get away, I might just sign it and go away. But the reality is that their signature collectors were not being honest, and partially maybe it's because they were not really being educated as to what this is. We talked about how this is such a confusing ballot initiative. And I think even for us, right, when we first saw the language, we needed to sit down with it and really read it through and do the research before we came to a coalition stance on this ballot initiative. So I think that's one of the things that's really just bothering. And as you said, Annette, it has qualified, and their campaign continues to be dishonest with Nevada voters. I have gotten so many mailers, text messages, digital ads with the amazing veteran who is on their campaign literature and images that, he's talking about the fact that if this were to pass, 600,000 more people would be able to participate in the election. Well, one, I think it's really not okay that they're using somebody's service to our country as a ploy for this ballot initiative. But beyond that, that's not really accurate. In the state of Nevada right now, if you are registered nonpartisan, you do have the ability to participate in primaries. And that's if there's nonpartisan folks who are running for the particular office, which in many cases there are. So I think it's really just honestly not being clear with voters as to what the whole package is, because if Nevada voters really understood what the impact of RCV was, they would not support this ballot initiative. Frankly, when we talk about open primaries, our coalition doesn't have a stance on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I can understand why some people may be attracted to it. But the reality is that this ballot initiative has two aspects to it. And this campaign is being dishonest to you by not talking about both aspects of it.
Couldn't agree more. So talk to our folks at home before I get to audience questions. Again, if you have questions for any of the ballot measures, now's the time to put them in the chat. What are some good resources for people to look into question 3 more so they can make an informed decision this election cycle and oppose this ballot measure?
Yes, I think one of the things is that we were able, myself and my colleague, Mr. Eric Lester Jang, we were part of the committee to write the official opinion as to why we oppose question 3. And so if you have not received your sample ballot, or if you have already, make sure you check out that opinion there in your sample ballot. Our official stance is there. And I think, Annette, you have some great resources that I'm not going to mention, but your voter materials should talk about that as well.
Yes, and she can't say those words, but I can. That is the NevadaBallotGuide.com. We will put it in the chat again. Go there. We have all the information on question 3 and why you should vote no on question 3. So once again, we want you to vote yes on question 1 and 2 and no on question 3. All right. So Emily, there's a question from the chat for you. If there was an open primary, would that create what's called a jungle primary where everyone votes together, or 2 voters pick a party they want to vote in, or can a voter vote in any and all primaries? How would this work?
I'm not really familiar with the term jungle primary, but if this ballot initiative were to pass, then it would mean that you could vote for any candidate regardless of your party affiliation. But remember that if you're doing that with this ballot initiative, then the top 5 folks in each position are going to make it over to the general election.
All right, we have another comment in the chat from Manny. He said, Emily, they approached me at a Walmart and asked me if I think it's fair that nonpartisans can't vote in a primary. And when I told them to buzz off, they said, well, it's not fair to me as a nonpartisan. And again, I think that's just so totally untrue. So talk, and again, if we want to address a primary, let's have that conversation, but don't shove it together with a ballot initiative that goes in the Constitution with ranked choice voting, because that's what this is really about.
Yes. And shaming voters to do something because you personally don't agree with it, I don't think that that's the most effective way to get people to support something you believe in. But currently in a general election, regardless of your party affiliation, you can vote for whoever you want. In the primary currently, there are many positions, school board, all of those folks are nonpartisan. There is a primary for that. This past primary as well, there were several other different positions that folks could vote for that were nonpartisan. Judges, there's a whole slew of them that are all nonpartisan. So this notion that nonpartisans have no voice in primaries is just inaccurate.
All right, Christine.
I will just say last thing. And if you really, really have feelings about it, at the end of the day, you're a registered nonpartisan and you want to vote for a Republican candidate or a Democrat candidate, you can thank AB 345 because we have same-day voter registration, and you can change your voter registration if you care that much and vote for that candidate.
That's what I said today when I was yelling about this in the office. Christine, I want to come back to you really quickly on question 2. We do have a question in the chat. We'll ask, what is an example of a state law? Oh, wrong one. How does question 2 tie Nevada's minimum wage to the federal requirement? So can you talk about how that actually probably undoes it?
Well, yeah. So we have language, and I think it's actually both within the statute and would be in this moving forward, that we're setting 12 as our floor. But if the federal minimum wage increased above that, we would again increase to be at a higher minimum wage, but we will not be lower than the $12 floor that we're setting.
Great. So this sets the floor, but if the federal government ever in our lifetime decides to get their asses together, it will go up. Okay, we'll see if we ever see that. All right, Kate, I'm going to start with you. Make your final closing argument why voters across Nevada should vote yes on question 1.
Hello, everyone. The most important thing that you can do for equality this election is to vote yes on 1. The top 3 reasons are it includes everyone. It's equality for all. It's expansive. It's inclusive. It is permanent. It's in the Constitution. So no matter who comes into office or, who controls the Nevada legislature in the future, the prime value, the foundation of equality will be in the Constitution. And so it's that easy. We're one step away. It will be a huge victory. It will put Nevada as the leader for equality all across the country. So yes on 1.
Thank you. All right, Christine, final argument as to why people should vote yes on question 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. There are just 3 simple things that question 2 does. Align the text in the Constitution to be with the statute language to raise the minimum wage we passed earlier. Make clear that the legislature needs to keep monitoring and increasing the minimum wage so that we don't have a stagnant minimum wage for the next 10 years. And remove that healthcare loophole that has allowed businesses to be able to pay $1 less while offering these garbage plans, I'll use Annette's language there too, harming workers so that they really end up even worse off when they are in moments of crisis. So We really need to ensure that everyone is making a fair minimum wage. I'd love to see minimum wage continue to go up in the state and at the federal level, but this will make a big difference in people's lives this election.
Thank you, Christine. And Emily, why should people vote no on question 3 this cycle?
Nevada voters should vote no on question 3 because we have done so much work in the state of Nevada to ensure that every Nevadan has access to the ballot, from passing same-day voter registration, vote by mail, so on and so forth. There are so many different policies that really ensure that every Nevadan has the ability to vote in our electoral system. Don't be fooled by this narrative that our current systems are not accessible. They are. Passing ranked choice voting would just be another way of confusing Nevada voters and making sure that they don't turn out to vote.
All right, so you heard it here. Vote yes on question 1, the Equal Rights Amendment. Vote yes on question 2, around changing the way our minimum wage is implemented. And vote no on question 3, which changes our voting system and basically lies to voters. So in our chat, we will have the link to the Nevada Voter Guide that explains all 3 of these important statewide initiatives. Check that out, send it around to your friends and family so they know where we're at statewide on these ballot initiatives, and you can be educated, and so can your family when you go to the polls. And just a reminder, your mail ballots are going to start dropping here pretty quickly, so make sure you're checking your mail because they are going to start coming, and early voting starts all across Nevada on October 22nd. It runs for 2 weeks, and then you can vote again on election. In front about how to vote, when to vote, all of those good things with our team. So join us next week about our early vote special live at 5 on Thursday next week. Thanks again, everyone. Remember, vote yes on 1, vote yes on 2, vote no on 3. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening.